welcome back to the Deep Dive. If you are joining us today, you are exactly who we make this show for.
You are the learner.
Exactly. You are someone who is, intensely curious about the world, who loves those sudden aha moments.
And who wants the real story without drowning in just an ocean of disorganized information.
Right, and our mission today is to do exactly that. We are exploring a massive, incredibly detailed compilation of historical research regarding the life, the enduring myth, and the truly surprising reality of the English poet Rupert Brooke.
It is a privilege to be doing this with you. We are looking at a historical figure who has basically been frozen in amber.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Whenever the cultural conversation turns to the First World War, Rupert Brooke is almost always presented as this flawless marble statue of patriotism and tragic sacrifice.
Right.
But as we unpack the historical documentation today, we're going to see that the actual human being walking around Edwardian England was wonderfully and often painfully complex.
To really understand this, I want to paint a picture for you. Imagine a man who genuinely seemed to have it all.
Oh, he really did.
He was so charismatic and physically striking that the legendary Irish poet W.B. Yeats literally went on record describing him as the handsomest young man in England.
Which is high praise from Yeats.
Seriously. And he penned The Soldier, which stands as arguably one of the most famous idealistic war sonnets of the entire First World War.
Absolutely.
So when you hear a resume like that, you naturally assume this guy meets his end in some dramatic blaze of battlefield glory.
Oh.
But, and here's the hook, he didn't.
No, he didn't.
He died from a mosquito bite on a French hospital ship.
It really is one of the great tragic historical ironies of that era. And what's fascinating here is how quickly a messy, vibrant, incredibly restless life gets sanitized into a convenient two-dimensional symbol for a grieving nation.
Right, they just smoothed out all the rough edges.
Exactly. The goal of our deep dive today is to completely dismantle that golden boy myth. We need to look at the deeply complex, surprisingly modern, and undeniably flawed human being underneath the famous poetry.
Because when we strip away the mythology and look at his actual life, it makes him infinitely more interesting than the legend.
Far more interesting.
Okay, let's unpack this. To understand how he became this ultimate symbol of English patriotism, we have to look at where he came from. Did he have a typical upper-class upbringing?
Very much so, but with a twist that put him right in the pressure cooker of the British educational system from day one.
How so?
Well, Rupert Chawner Brooke was born in 1887 into a fiercely academic family. His parents, William and Ruth, actually met while working at Fettes College in Edinburgh.
Okay.
But because that school didn't have accommodation for married schoolmasters, his father had to resign.
Wow, that's harsh.
It was the reality of the time. So they moved to Rugby in Warwickshire, where his father eventually became a housemaster at the famous rugby school.
So Brooke didn't just attend an elite school.
No, he literally grew up inside of one.
That has to create a unique kind of pressure. You aren't just a student. You are the housemaster's son living in a glass house.
Exactly. You are constantly observed.
And there's a fascinating little detail in his family tree, too. He was named after his maternal great-grandfather, a distinguished doctor who's actually descended from a regicide.
Yes.
His ancestor, the man named Thomas Challoner, actually signed the death warrant for King Charles I. So he has this undercurrent of rebellion deep in his pedigree.
That is a brilliant detail to keep in mind, especially as we see how he navigates the very rigid social structures of his time.
Right.
He went to prep school locally, then attended rugby school. He had an older brother, Dick, and a younger brother, William Alfred, who was affectionately known as Podge.
Podge, I love that.
But where the charisma factor really explodes and he starts becoming this larger-than-life figure is when he goes up to King's College, Cambridge in October 1906 to study classics.
Because from the records, it sounds like he wasn't just a student at Cambridge. He was a force of nature.
Oh, entirely.
He was everywhere all at once.
He absolutely was. He didn't just join clubs, he ran them. He was elected president of the University Fabian Society.
Which is crucial, right?
Very. It shows he was leaning into prominent socialist political thought, not just traditional conservative ideals.
Right, he's pushing boundaries.
Then he became a member of the Cambridge Apostles, which was an incredibly exclusive, highly intellectual secret society.
The elite of the elite.
Exactly. On top of that, he helped found the Marlowe Society Drama Club and acted in the Cambridge Greek play. He systematically placed himself at the absolute center of Cambridge's cultural and intellectual life.
And it wasn't just resume building. People were genuinely drawn to him. He seemed to cast a spell over almost everyone he met.
He really did.
There's a detail from the historical accounts about George Mallory, the famous mountaineer who would later disappear on Mount Everest, completely falling under Brooke's spell.
Yes, Mallory was captivated by him.
But I have to say, my absolute favorite anecdote from this period completely shatters the stuffy, buttoned-up image we have of Edwardian England.
I think I know which one you're going to mention.
Virginia Woolf later told the writer Vita Sackville-West that she and Brooke had gone skinny dipping together in a moonlit pool during their Cambridge days.
It is a fantastic image, isn't it?
It's amazing.
It completely undercuts the black and white, rigid, historical footage we usually associate with that era.
Right, it makes them feel like real people.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, Brooke represented the ultimate Edwardian ideal. He embodied youth, intellect, and physical beauty in this golden age just before the devastation of the First World War changed the world forever.
The poster boy for an era.
Yes, he was the poster boy for a generation that didn't yet know it was standing on the edge of a cliff.
But even within that so-called golden age, things weren't perfect for him. In 1907, his older brother Dick died of pneumonia at just 26 years old.
A terrible tragedy.
Brooke actually wanted to put his studies on hold to help his parents grieve, which seems like a totally natural response, but his parents absolutely insisted he go back to university.
That reaction from his parents tells you so much about the emotional repression of the time.
Stiff upper lip and all that.
The expectation was to carry on, to maintain the trajectory. So he went back, and he started putting down serious roots in these legendary literary circles.
Earning a fellowship at King's College in 1913.
Yes, for a thesis on John Webster and the Elizabethan drama. He became associated with the Georgian Poets, specifically the Dymock Poets in Gloucestershire.
Rubbing shoulders with literary heavyweights like Robert Frost and Edward Thomas.
Exactly. He even lived at the old vicarage in Grantchester, which inspired one of his best-known poems.
Looking at that timeline, it seems like a continuous, effortless upward trajectory. But when you look at his personal life, it is a completely different story.
Oh, completely.
The historical narrative often remembers him as this stoic, traditional, patriotic soldier. But his romantic life was incredibly fluid, passionate, and painfully complicated.
Yes, the private Brooke is very different from the public monument. His romantic life was deeply complex.
Tell us about that.
We see intense romantic involvements with fellow male pupils from his time at Rugby, including Charles Lascelles, Denham Russell Smith, and Michael Sadler.
Okay.
He also had an older mentor named St. John Lucas. He was searching for connection across a very wide spectrum.
And his relationships with women were just as intense and layered. He was involved with an artist named Phyllis Gardner, the actress Kathleen Nesbitt, and he was even engaged at one point to Noelle Olivier,
who he met at a progressive school when she was just 15.
Right. Then there was Elizabeth van Rysselberg, the daughter of a painter he met in Munich in 1911.
Yes.
The documentation notes that this affair came the closest to being fully consummated of any he'd had up to that point, and they may have actually become lovers in a complete sense a couple years later.
When you look at all these relationships collectively, it paints a picture of a man who is incredibly restless.
Yeah, always searching.
He had this massive gravitational pull. So many people were deeply in love with him. But being the center of everyone's emotional universe takes a huge psychological toll.
Wait, I want to pause on that. Because on the surface, being young, brilliant, and desired by everyone sounds incredibly glamorous.
Yeah.
But wasn't that exhausting for him?
It was entirely exhausting, and it eventually broke him. In 1912, that golden boy facade completely shatters.
Right.
He suffered a severe emotional crisis, essentially a nervous breakdown. And the epicenter of this crisis was the total collapse of his long-term relationship with a woman named Catherine Laird Cox, who was usually known as Ca Cox.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This wasn't just a bad breakup. It spiraled into intense paranoia, right?
Exactly. He became absolutely convinced that the writer Lytton Strachey had actively, maliciously schemed to destroy his relationship with Ca Cox.
By encouraging her to see another man, Henry Lamb.
Yes. Now, whether that was true or just magnified by his own fragile mental state, the result was devastating.
It really was.
This paranoia didn't just end a romance. It caused a massive falling out with his friends in the Bloomsbury Group.
For those who might not know, the Bloomsbury Group were basically the ultimate bohemian avant-garde intellectuals of London.
The center of the cultural universe.
Right. These were brilliant people like Virginia Woolf who were rewriting the rules of art, literature, and sexuality.
They were brilliant, but they were also living completely in each other's pockets.
I can imagine.
It was an intense, claustrophobic environment where the emotional stakes were incredibly high. Brooke's paranoia over the Lytton-Strachey gossip basically alienated him from some of the brightest minds in London.
He just burned his bridges.
He burned his bridges and suffered a total collapse.
So how do you recover from a social and emotional collapse of that magnitude when you are one of the most famous young men in England?
By running as far away as geographically possible. He went to Germany initially for rehabilitation, but that wasn't enough. He ended up taking a massive global tour.
Just left everything behind.
He traveled across the United States and Canada, writing travel diaries to fund the trip, sending dispatches back to the Westminster Gazette.
Okay.
And then he took the long way home across the Pacific, spending months in the South Seas.
You're telling me this quintessential British intellectual basically abandoned high society and ran away to the tropics?
He did. And it was exactly what he needed. The contrast between the stuffy, gossip-filled drawing rooms of London and the freedom of the South Seas was profound.
I bet.
It's in Tahiti that he seems to finally find some genuine peace.
Yeah, there's a fascinating detail that came to light much later. Brooke may have fathered a daughter with a Tahitian woman named Tatamata.
Yes.
Crucially, historical records suggest that he enjoyed his most complete emotional relationship with her. He literally had to travel to the other side of the planet to find a connection he couldn't sustain in elite English society.
It's poetic in its own way.
But history, as it always does, catches up with him. He returns to England, and in August 1914, the First World War breaks out.
The world changes overnight.
By this time, his poetry had gained serious traction. He was being championed by Edward Mush, a prominent patron of the arts, who actually brought Brooke's work to the attention of Winston Churchill.
Who was a very powerful figure.
And Churchill, at the time, was the first Lord of the Admiralty.
Yeah.
So shortly after turning 27, Brooke was commissioned into the Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve as a temporary sub-lieutenant.
He was assigned to the Royal Naval Division. This was an interesting setup. It was essentially an infantry division made up of Navy and Marine personnel who weren't needed at sea.
Right.
He actually saw combat early on, taking part in the Siege of Antwerp in October 1914.
Wow.
But let's be clear, it wasn't his military strategy or his combat record that made him a legend. It was his pen.
Yes, the poetry. In March 1915, the Times Literary Supplement published two of his sonnets, The Dead and the Soldier.
Two of his most iconic works.
And then on Easter Sunday, April 4th, 1915, The Soldier was read aloud from the pulpit of St. Paul's Cathedral in London.
I want you to really think about the psychological state of Britain at that exact moment.
Yeah, paint that picture for us.
The war is new. The horrifying reality of trench warfare, the endless slaughter, hasn't fully set in yet, but the casualty lists are starting to grow.
Right.
The nation is terrified. They desperately needed to believe that this sacrifice was beautiful, noble, and pure.
They needed a reason for the pain.
And then, from the pulpit of the most famous cathedral in the country, they hear Brooke's words. His poetry perfectly captured that tragic, romantic idealism. It gave the country a language to process their fear and their grief.
It's hard to overstate the platform of St. Paul's Cathedral on Easter Sunday. His words were echoing through the absolute heart of the British Empire.
Exactly.
But the reality of war is never as clean or romantic as a sonnet. And this brings us to the staggering irony of his death. He didn't die going over the top of a trench, and he didn't go down with a ship in a blaze of glory.
No, he didn't. In February 1915, he sailed with the British Mediterranean Expeditionary Force toward the Gallipoli landings.
Which we know now would become one of the most brutal campaigns of the war.
Truly horrific. But while stationed in Egypt, he developed severe gastroenteritis. His immune system was compromised.
Right.
And then he got a simple mosquito bite on his lip.
A mosquito bite.
Yeah.
That is just difficult to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
It developed into streptococcal sepsis.
Yes.
He was moved to a French hospital ship, the Duguay-Tron, which was moored in a bay off the Greek island of Skyros.
The medical staff desperately tried to save him.
French surgeons actually performed 2 operations trying to drain the abscess, but the blood poisoning had spread too far.
The description we have of his final hours is incredibly atmospheric.
It's haunting.
It doesn't sound anything like the chaotic horror you picture when you think of a First World War military hospital. His close friend, William Dennis Brown, who was also a musician, sat with him at the end. Brown recorded that Brooke died at 4:46 in the afternoon on April 23, 1915. He was just 27 years old.
So young.
Brown noted that the sun was shining all around his cabin, a cool sea breeze was blowing through the open door, and the air was fragrant with the smell of sage and thyme blowing off the mountains of the island.
It is a profoundly peaceful image. But the military machine doesn't stop for poetry. What happens next is incredibly urgent.
Right.
The expeditionary force had strict orders to depart immediately for the Gallipoli Peninsula.
Oh.
They literally could not wait.
No time to mourn.
So they had to bury him that very night at 11 p.m. in an olive grove on Skyros. Another friend and fellow war poet, Patrick Shaw Stewart, had to help conduct this hurried moonlit funeral before they sailed off to battle.
And if you want a detail that perfectly encapsulates the staggering, relentless loss of that entire generation, just weeks later, Brooke's surviving younger brother, William Alfred.
Podge.
Yes, Podge fell in action on the Western Front in June 1915. He had only been in France on active service for 19 days.
That is just staggering. Within a matter of weeks, the Brooke family loses 2 sons.
Unimaginable grief.
It really underscores that behind these marble monuments and massive book sales, there were real families being absolutely hollowed out by this conflict.
It's a vital perspective to hold on to, because while his family was quietly grieving this unimaginable double loss, Brooke's public popularity absolutely exploded.
Right.
It transitioned from literary fame into a full-blown global phenomenon. His collection, 1914 and Other Poems, was published just a month after he died in the Mediterranean.
And the sales were insane.
To give you a sense of the sheer demand, it ran to 11 impressions in that first year alone. By June 1918, it was on its 24th impression.
The emotional impact his work had on the public, and even on the hardened military leadership, is hard to fathom today.
It really is.
There's an incredibly touching anecdote from the historical account set in 1917. Field Marshal Edmund Allenby, one of the most senior British commanders, received news that his own son, Michael, had been killed in action. This hardened general actually broke down in tears in public while reciting a poem by Rupert Brooke. It proves that Brooke's words had literally become the emotional language for a grieving nation.
His influence crossed oceans, too. The Canadian fighter pilot John Gillespie McGee Jr., who wrote the incredibly famous aviator poem High Flight, explicitly cited Brooke as an inspiration.
He even wrote a sonnet to Rupert Brooke in 1938.
He did.
But I think it's important we don't just print the legend here. Not everyone was swept up in the Brooke mythology.
That is a very important point. As a critical counterbalance, we have to look at how other writers reacted to this monumentalizing of his work.
Right.
The writer Lord Alfred Douglas, for example, issued a scathing critique in 1919. Douglas wrote that the massive enthusiasm over what he called Brooke's puerile crudities meant that true poetry was despised and dishonored, and that same criticism is dead or moribund.
Wow, he didn't hold back.
Not at all.
Yeah.
So there was absolutely a fierce backlash against turning his poetry into sacred, untouchable text.
Despite the critics, the commemorations went ahead and cemented his legacy in stone, quite literally.
Yes, they did.
The original wooden cross from his hurried grave on Skyros was eventually brought back to Rugby by his mother. Today, there are memorials to him everywhere.
The first stanza of his poem, The Dead, is inscribed on the Royal Naval Division War Memorial in London.
Lines from his poetry are carved into the pediment of the cenotaph in Wellington, New Zealand.
There's a statue of him in his army uniform standing in his front garden in Grantchester.
And another statue by Ivor Roberts-Jones in his birth town of Rugby.
They physically carved him into the foundation of British literary history. In 1985, he was one of 16 First World War poets commemorated on a slate monument in Poets' Corner in Westminster Abbey.
Right.
But there is a profound irony in that specific memorial. The inscription they chose to engrave on that monument in Poets' Corner actually comes from Wilfred Owen,
Who wrote, "My subject is war and the pity of war. The poetry is in the pity."
Exactly. Wilfred Owen's poetry was gritty, angry, and deeply disillusioned.
The exact opposite of Brooke's romantic idealism.
Placing them together is a subtle reminder of the profound tragedy of all these lost, contrasting voices.
So what does this all mean? We started this deep dive with the image of the handsomest young man in England, the golden boy who wrote The Soldier.
Yes.
But what we actually found in the historical records was a man who went skinny dipping in the moonlight with Virginia Woolf, who navigated incredibly fluid and complicated romances.
Who suffered paranoid breakdowns over literary gossip.
Right, and who finally found his most complete emotional connection on a beach in Tahiti. He was transformed into a tragic symbol of a lost generation, but his actual messy, vibrant life makes him far more fascinating than any marble statue ever could.
The myth is powerful, but the man is real. And this raises an important question sparked by two incredibly evocative details from our research that we haven't touched on yet.
Oh, lay it on us.
The records mention that right after Brooke died on that hospital ship, his friend Frederick Septimus Kelly took Brooke's personal notebooks, which contained important late poems, for safekeeping to return them to England.
Okay.
It also mentions a recent 2023 painting of Brooke by the artist Stephen Hopper, which specifically features a blank sheet of paper symbolizing work unfulfilled.
A blank sheet of paper. That is haunting.
I want you to ponder that blank sheet of paper for a moment. If a single infected mosquito bite hadn't ended his life at 27, how would those unfulfilled late poems in that notebook have evolved?
Yeah?
If he had survived the horrors of the Gallipoli campaign, would he have returned to England stripped of his Edwardian idealism? Would he have started writing the gritty, disillusioned, angry poetry of Wilfred Owen or Siegfried Sassoon?
Or would he have stubbornly maintained his romanticism to the bitter end?
Exactly. It really makes you wonder how much of our literary canon and the very way we remember historical eras is dictated by something as random and fragile as the biology of a mosquito bite.
That is an incredible thought to leave on, the absolute fragility of history. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the myths behind the history, keep looking for the messy realities, and we will see you next time.